Almost 25 years ago, the final curtain fell on Great Yarmouth's professional theatre. It had run since just after the war. Take your seat as Tony Mallion tells the story of the little theatre in a play at the Seaside.
Those were some of the happiest days of my life, because I used to look forward so much to Saturday night to going to the theatre, because there was a different play, of course, every time you went. You saw your favourite actors and actresses doing different parts all the time. This was the exciting thing. Would you recognise them? And they were all so talented. Each week they did something different. You'd have a juvenile lead, you'd have the character actors and the character actresses, and it was, well, just a thrill every time I went.
It took me 3 years to actually get through the door into the dressing rooms. It was a pure excitement. I'd sit out here and watch the magic, because it was magic in those days, it really was, and wonder how on earth they did some of the things they did. And then on my 15th birthday, through the door and I found out.
Maureen Miller and John Hunt, two Yarmouth people, teenagers then, who both came under the magical spell of the Little Theatre. John Hunt was to join the company for 7 years. It was a playhouse which operated in what is now Cinema 2 at the Royalty Theatre. It started life as the Minor Hall upstairs, a banqueting room and later a dance hall. But it was after the war that a small stage, just 20 feet by 15 feet, was installed, and with it, Peter Elliston and his Aurora Players. Donald Adams joined the company in January 1949.
Yes, the Aurora Players, Great Yarmouth. 44 years the last time I walked up these stairs. Incredible. I can still walk up them. Well, it's incredible. Oh, dear, dear, dear. Oh, and that was where they used to make the coffees, used to be, right ahead of us, wasn't it? It's been mauled in now. How marvellous to be back again. Now I shall get my bearings now. That used to be way backstage, isn't it? And that's the auditorium. And it was in the back of the auditorium that Michael Thomason used to paint all the scenery over the last 4 rows of the stalls. Look at... Ah! Well, that's absolutely great, isn't it? Huh. Yeah, a lot of history in this theatre.
You bought your tickets at the bottom of the staircase.
And as you came in through the doors, it was facing you. It was a funny little box, literally box office being a lovely description. Little tiny glass panel, and Mrs. Vi Palmer, who used to take money and sell the best tickets in the house if she could.
Ah, would that it was always that easy. When Anthony Cundell ran the theatre, a Mr. Harrington was in charge of the box office.
He was a bit deaf, and I was in the box office one day and the phone rang and somebody said, "Is that the theatre?" "Yes. I want to book 3 seats in row E for tomorrow night." "A? No, row E." "Ah, no, row E." "Oh, no, row E." "Well, why didn't you say so in the first place?" he said. But he was like that. He's a lovely fella, but he got a bit flustered at times.
Like all theatres, the Little Theatre had its own unmistakable smell.
Anybody who's ever worked in a theatre, a live theatre, will tell you there is a smell, and you can equate the smell with theatre. This one, when you came in, obviously there was smoke, because people were allowed to smoke in those days. There was paint, bearing in mind that every day of the week, somewhere a set was being painted. It had to be, and but one set was up, the other one was being painted. Sweat, definitely. Makeup, the good old Leishner, 5 and 9, cover up the wrinkles. Mixed with the coffee from Phyllis's little snack bar out there, but the whole lot mixed together to make one smell that was just a Little Theatre. And for years afterwards, I knew that if I ever did smell it, I'd know exactly where I was.
Very small theatre, lovely atmosphere, and I suppose everybody remarks on the smells that were left in that theatre. Coffee in the foyer, the floral bouquet stuff that we used to spray around in between houses, and of course your inevitable grease paint, which is always in theatres.
Barbara Footer, a former dancer who was an usherette at the theatre. Part of that unmistakable aroma was Phyllis Hannant's coffee.
Phyllis didn't sell programmes, of course. She would stand behind the counter bar, waiting for her guests, reminding them that some of her famous freshly ground coffee would be on sale in the first interval. Now that was great fun, of course, because Phyllis was the only one who was allowed to make the coffee. The other two usherettes, that includes me, we were allowed to serve it and to sell it, but not to make it.
It's time to leave the foyer and go into the auditorium. Now a cinema, of course, but then it had 300 seats and a small balcony. John Hunt, who used to live at Beatty Road, first went through the swing doors in 1947.
Well, my mother really started my interest in the theatre on my 12th birthday, which was 1947. I was taken to see a production of The Winslow Boy here, and I can remember enjoying the play, although I suppose 12-year-old boy watching The Winslow Boy, it was a bit wordy. I think it still is, probably, the first act. And then I got hooked, and I saw every production for the next 3 years. And if we can go over here, I'll probably show you roughly where I used to sit.
Right, let's find your seat that you used to occupy.
In row C, 5 and 6. It was 5 when I hadn't got a girlfriend and 6 when I had.
So we're moving down to the front.
Roughly. Now, we've got to remember that this has changed a bit.
Yes, there's a cinema screen now, of course, and when it had a stage, the stage came out further than the cinema screen, which is almost against the back wall. So we need to come back a few seats, don't we?
Yeah, and I can vaguely remember the pillar down there was roughly where row C was, so we're talking about A, B, C.
So we're about here. Let's take a seat. Here we go, across to the middle of the auditorium. Oh, the tip-up seats. Let's sit
Much
down.
nicer seats, actually, than when we were here, of course. Although, I don't know, I think ours were a bit wider. They were a tatty old browny plush colour. And they had the dreaded ashtrays in front, and we've still got them.
So how did you actually get involved? How did you get from row C here onto the stage?
Well, as I said, I'd seen every production for 3 years. By now I wanted to go into the theatre, without doubt. And I can remember having a long and heated discussion, almost an argument with my father. And the final words were, well, if you're so interested in the bloody theatre, go and get a job there. Well, you don't say that to a 15-year-old. So I came and saw a play here called Peril on the Pier, and I saw it on the Monday, and on the Tuesday I cycled up along the front, parked my bike, and with heart pumping away, walked up the stairs, saw Phyllis Hannant, who I used to call Auntie Phyllis, and said, is Mr. Elliston there? Because he was running the company. And he came out and saw me, and I said, please, I want a job. And he said, when can you start? And I said, now. And I was taken backstage, and that night I was doing the sound effects for Peril on the Pier.
But he wasn't to be stuck backstage for long. A walk-on part in French Without Tears, and then director John French offered him a speaking part in William Douglas Hume's Master of Arts.
So he gave me a script and said, well, read that scene. And I remember I walked up and down reading it because I was absolutely terrified. And he bellowed from the back of the theatre, stand still and read it again. And I did. And he said, OK, thank you. And I walked off the stage and thought that's the end of it. But at the end of the morning, he called me and gave me the script and said, Tran, can you learn the first act by Monday? So, yes, and it was Master of Arts by William Douglas Hume. And in that play, Donald played the housemaster. So here we are again.
40 years on, and you're going to give us an extract from the play.
Yes. Excuse me, sir.
What the devil are you doing, Spender?
Sir, I want to ask you something, sir.
Go back to bed at once.
Why should I, sir?
Because I tell you to, and you're ill.
Oh, no, I'm not.
Oh, you are. Miss Osborne said you were.
Well, Miss Osborne made a mistake.
Are you delirious?
No, sir.
Well, she told me you had a temperature.
Not me. I held it next to the electric light bulb in my room.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I did, for nearly 7 minutes. Then she looked at it and found that it was up.
So you were shamming?
Yes, and how?
And may one ask precisely why?
Because I didn't want to go to school today.
Oh, indeed. Is that why you're dressed like that?
Oh, no, sir. I'm dressed like this because I'm going to Ascot, sir. Oh, and please, sir, could I borrow your field glasses,
Now
sir?
listen, Spender.
Please, sir, racing starts at 2:30.
Spender?
All right, I'll listen if you like, but make it brief.
Yeah, I'll make it brief, but I doubt if the headmaster will.
Well, in Master of Arts, Donald actually saved my life. I was very frightened. in that production, quite a long part to learn. And we had to listen to a radio broadcast of the race commentary because he didn't let me go to Ascot in the end. The commentary, in fact, was recorded over in the Bates studios on the Britannia Pier by either a member of the cast or even Mr. Bates himself, I don't know. But in this night in question, the main switchboard developed lighting board developed a fault. A fuse blew, half the lights went out, and the commentary stopped. And I was left with egg on my face because my cue came from the recorded commentary and no cue came. And Donald, as the housemaster, said, "Spender, go and find Matron and see if she's got another battery for the radio. It seems to have stopped," and pushed me off stage. Whereupon I rushed round to Desmond O'Callaghan, the stage manager, and he said, "Tell them to keep it going for a minute. The main fuse has gone." So I came back on stage, and Donald met me face on so that I couldn't be seen, and I passed the message on to him, and then he and John Franklyn-Robbins ad-libbed and kept the thing going and pretended they could hear the race commentary, and we got back on track again.
I didn't get any royalties for that, making up the new play. Yes, these things happened in rep. There's nothing worse than having a red-hot poker going through your stomach when you're on stage and you know that something should be happening and you should be doing it, and nothing is happening. I mean, it's a terrifying moment. What they get the butterflies in your stomach. And it happens in opera too, except the disastrous effects, because you've got an orchestra of 70 going one way and you've gone the other, and it's very difficult. But this is the how you learn your trade in the theatre, in a rep company like Yarmouth, that these things do go wrong, and you suddenly have to do your best to get out of them.
And that was something Anthony Cundell found out in a thriller, when the poison wasn't there.
I forget what play it was. It was one of Robert Morley's plays. I can't remember the name of the play. But at one point, I have to take this phial of poison out of my waistcoat pocket and pour this poison into a drink, this woman's drink, while she's not looking. And as I come up to this piece, in the dialogue, I suddenly had a mental picture of my makeup place in the dressing room. And there on the makeup place was this phial of poison. And I thought, oh dear, I should have had that, should be in my waistcoat pocket now. So I then had to go through an elaborate mime, turning my back to the audience and sort of pretending I got the bottle in my hand. And here again, I think I got away with it because nobody sort of tittered or anything. I think, but it is a nasty moment when you suddenly realise you're in a situation where there's no turning back. You've just got to go on and hope for the best.
Murphy's Law says if something can go wrong, it generally does, and that was often true, particularly when space was so limited backstage. Take the case of the disappearing actor, recalled by Lorna Green.
We had a very tall, thin actor called Graham Lyons, very nice man. I don't know what's happened to him now, actually. And they were doing a play one week that was a thriller, and there was a sort of secret panel behind a grandfather clock on the stage that he had to slip through, go after the villain, I think, and then come back within about a minute on stage to round the play off. And unfortunately, at the back of the stage, the back wall had got two large thick pipes about a foot or a couple of foot from the ground, and standing a foot away from the wall, and Graham went through this narrow space on one occasion and stepped between the pipes and the wall, and there he was jammed. And his entrance came up, and there was this scuffling noise, and nobody could really reach him, and there was a very, very long pause while he managed to get out and get back on stage for his entrance. But that is the trouble with a small stage, that you are very confined off the set.
The audiences were probably unaware of the panic backstage. Not that you could always cover up. Ruth Kettlewell was a leading lady of the little theatre for several years, and for a time ran the company. But one night she found herself literally holding the whole show together. The scenery was in danger of falling down.
The set is made of flats, canvas flats with battens, wooden battens, and this is in the old days, and they used to have ropes on them, and you roped them together, you see, and then you had stage weights to keep them steady. Well, some idiot once came along, and I think he got the sack, and not surprisingly, and so out of revenge he went round and took down all the he pulled all the cords with cleat lines, and so he was standing like that, doing a marvellous scene, holding up the flat, because you knew it was going to fall down if you let go. So there were a few hairy moments like that, and there were some very hairy moments when the tabs got stuck. and the ASM had to climb up a ladder and crawl along the top, and you were sitting there on stage with the tabs 3/4 drawn, and you were probably having a scene with hysterics or something. You had to keep the hysterics going until somebody had knit the tabs together again. So there were some fairly hairy moments like that, yes.
Donald Adams had a problem with paint.
Well, that was the production of Peril on the Pier, which was one of these things we had to do in rep. And it was sort of a smuggling story. And Ruth, I remember one of your lines was when we were all marooned. And they said, one line was said, what are we going to eat? And somebody said, well, there's some beans here. And you said, Ruth, there's enough wind round here already. That line is stuck in my mind. But also I had to play, I was the baddie. And they used to have this haunting thing, she used to scream. And I had to come on through a scene at the back in a black suit, and I had luminous paint on my hands and my face just to make it look more horrific. And as all actors do when you do a quick change, which it was, I put the paint on and just made sure my fly buttons had done up, and of course I went out in dark, and of course all what was lit up from the audience was my hands, my face, and my flies.
The local audiences were fiercely loyal to the Little Theatre, particularly when it ran all the year round. Many had regular seats. Local garage owner Percy Trett recalls those days.
Heaven help you if you sat in a regular's position when you shouldn't have done. And latecomers, of course, were very much frowned upon. And people didn't come late. They respected the actors on the stage. It would have been an insult to have arrived late, wouldn't it?
There was always a good atmosphere in there, and everyone knew everyone, especially on Saturday night. The usual people had their usual seats. And you'd think, oh yes, well, I shall see old so-and-so on the end of the row. And we had a little chat, isn't it good tonight? And did you enjoy last week? Well, not as much as this week. And it was just all so friendly and happy.
And if by any chance you forgot to renew your permanent booking in the busy time, particularly in the summer, and you couldn't have your seat, you really resented the fact that somebody else was sitting there. You really did. And really you didn't like it when the summer came, because all these holidaymakers used to come in and sort of try and get seats. So yes, it was really like a club. It's a wonderful atmosphere.
They're very loyal. They're very loyal people. And as John just said, they booked their seats every week, and that was that. And it was a sort of family get-together. But they were loyal to us. They were awfully loyal to us. They loved that. I think they liked their artists, and they liked their rep company and considered it theirs, which quite rightly.
Now in her 80s, Esther Eamon, who with her late husband Cecil ran the Dr. Bernardo's home opposite the theatre, were among the regulars. So how often did they used to go?
Once a week, and if there was anything special we'd go again, you see. And sometimes Saturdays the staff used to go on their night off. You see, they weren't all off, of course, at the same time, but they used to go too. It was so near for us, you see, and not dear either. We really enjoyed going there, you know.
Usherette Barbara Footer recalls one family of regulars.
They were actually fortune tellers that used to work the season in Yarmouth. One of them working on the pier, and one had a little booth in or just off the marketplace. They always came to the Little Theatre on a Friday evening, and we knew we would wait at the top of the stairs at the Fiore with their box of black magic chocolates. It was always black magic, never anything else. And I can remember one evening in the middle of a very serious play, just as the inspector was about to reveal who the murderer was, one of the gypsies said, "Who's at the nutty cluster then?" Lovely people came to that theatre, and we got to know them as families, and really over the years you could watch the children grow up.
That's all very well, but imagine what it was like if you were on stage. Anthony Cundell again.
There was this elderly man, he was blind, and his wife used to bring him to the theatre every week, elderly couple, every single week they used to come and sit right in the middle of the front row. Now, we were doing this play with Ruth Kettlewell and myself, and in the piece, she had to put some ice cubes, which are poisoned, in a drink, because I think she's going to try and kill me, but I don't know how. Anyway, she said, have a drink and all that. Will you have ice? I said, oh yes. So by now the audience know that I'm being poisoned with the ice. I then have a long scene where I'm dying slowly and she is sort of upbraiding me for all the wrong that I've done. And all I can hear from the front row is this old girl saying, he's going. And a few minutes later, he's going. And then finally I do die, slump forward. And then all I heard was, he's gone. And it was very difficult to lie still as a dead body after that.
But audiences didn't always come. In the early 1950s, the curtain came down on Peter Elliston's Aurora productions. The final play under his management was Bianchi Bomb, and bomb it most certainly did. John Hunt.
When Peter Elliston had the company, very gradually, I suppose, television was beginning, and quite a few people did have television. And somehow or other, I don't know why, the interest in theatre seemed to die a bit, possibly due to weekly rep churning out, looking back, what must have been pretty dire plays, because it's very difficult to find a different play every week. And yes, audiences did decline. The last play that Peter Elliston put on here was a play called The Bianchi Bomb. I haven't been able to find a copy of that, and really I don't want to. But on the Saturday night, we had 12 people in the house, and he came onto the stage and asked if they'd like their money back. And they said no, they wanted to see the production. They all came down on the front row, and we did our final production to 12 people. And then we had a sort of party on stage afterwards, and we were washed with tears and nostalgia, and that was the end of the little theatre in Yarmouth, we thought. Then John Dodd from Caister Holiday Camp stepped in, reformed it, and took it from strength to strength. And the interesting thing about John was he realised that if people were on a week's holiday, because back in those days it probably wasn't a fortnight holiday, a week holiday was probably all people could afford. If he did the changeover on a Thursday rather than a Monday, he could grab theatre-goers for 2 plays in 1 week, and he did it, and it worked.
One of those holiday makers was Alec Yates, a self-confessed theatre fanatic, a former Leicestershire coal miner whose holidaying in Great Yarmouth eventually led him to move to the Seaside permanently. He and his wife Cathy would book their theatre visits a year in advance, including a trip to the Little Theatre, normally preceded with a meal at a restaurant in Regent Road. They dressed up and they treated it like it was. A trip to see a play was a real event.
This day and age, a lot of people go in casual wear, which is nice in a way, on holiday. But when you went to the theatre in that day and age, you always dressed up to the nines. Cathy and I would never dreamt of going in casual wear to the theatre, you know. We always dressed up to the nines. It was an event. You'd looked forward to it all the year round. Remember, I've been stuck down a coal mine all the years, and to come to Yarmouth and enjoy the beautiful fresh air.
He wasn't the only one who needed fresh air. The company Backstage were desperate for it. The conditions were cramped. It all got too much, and actors like John Hunt made a dash for the roof of the theatre for their own balcony scene.
Well, the balcony was very important, in fact, because particularly when we were doing houses at 6:10 and 8:30, the only way to get fresh air, literally, apart from running down the stairs to the loo, was to come out onto the balcony. So when the curtain came down at the end of the first performance, we would rush to the door, push it open, and take deep breaths, as we're doing now, coming out onto this lovely balcony. And it was absolutely wonderful. It was heaven, because the air in there was foul. You had audience smoking in those days. You had the smell of grease paint. Well, the smell of grease paint and the roar of the crowd, definitely. And we would come out on here, look across to the Britannia Pier and the sea breezes, and it was just wonderful.
The balcony also played a major role in scene building. Lorna Green.
The balcony was very useful, yes. The doors opened onto it directly from the place where I painted the scenery. And when the scenery had got very, very heavy with paint and it was beginning to drop off, crack and drop off, we used to take them outside onto the balcony, put them face down, and then pour boiling water onto them, which loosened the paint, and it all dropped off. And then you had some nice, light, clean-looking flats again to start working on. And this needed doing fairly frequently, considering the amount of times they were repainted.
Lorna Green, in real life Mrs. Anthony Cundell, not only painted the sets, she often played parts as well.
I did sometimes, yes, when there was a larger cast, or they had difficulty actually casting it because of types. You know, you had to sort of try and balance people with the parts as best you could. And I did, yes, played quite a few times.
Was that a bit of a nightmare, painting the sets, learning lines, doing all the same things, everything at once?
Not a particular nightmare. In fact, I think it was a bit of a comedy where some of the other artists were concerned, because they'd looked down into the place where I was painting scenery, and if I was also in the play that night, I would be painting away with possibly an evening gown with something wrapped over the front of it so that I wouldn't splash paint on it. I think once even I was sort of painting with a tiara on my head ready for an entrance.
In 1950, the Little Theatre staged its most spectacular production, George Bernard Shaw's St Joan. It had a cast of 30, so they needed to draft in members of the local amateur group, the Maskers, to make up the numbers and provide the costumes. Betty Taylor's late husband Jeff was one of those brought in. One night he saved St Joan, played by Dame Sybil Thorndyke's niece Sybil Eubank, who nearly brought the house down.
The scene he had with the Maid of Orleans waiting for the wind to turn into the right direction and the flag would turn round. And the flag was moved by a very thin piece of string that was pulled from the wings. It was pulled and things, so they set as they were to go. But Jeff had seen what Sybil Eubank hadn't seen, that her lance had caught underneath the string, and had she moved as it was required of her, she would have brought the whole thing down on both their heads. So he very firmly stood in front of her and physically held her in one spot, and she frowned at him, but continued delivering her lines. No idea why he was doing this, and not until they'd gone off and she was able to be cross with him, but he was able to say, no, look dear, if I'd not done that, you'd have had a really nasty accident on your hands.
During that run, Sybil nearly had a nasty accident off stage when she was out one day with Ruth Kettlewell.
I wasn't in St Joan, so I had a free week. So I thought I'd be decent to Sybil and sort of say that I'm a great bird watcher. So I said, would you like to come bird watching with me? And she said, yes, she would. So I took her over to Winterton, where I knew the... I shouldn't have said where it was, but I knew where the marsh harriers nested. And I used to go and watch them, you see. So I took poor Sybil, and we trudged across these dreary grounds, these flat marshlands. I'm very excited, and I saw the marsh harriers, and I was pointing this out. And suddenly there was a terrible shout from the field, and I thought they would take no notice. I know we're trespassing, but it doesn't matter. And when we got back, there was this poor little man standing at the field shouting at us, saying, that's a minefield you've just been walking over, we never found where the mines were.
It wasn't only adults who were borrowed for productions. The company also used children from the Dr. Bernardo's home opposite, as Lorna Cundell and Esther Eamon recall.
Well, very early in my first visit there, I think it was about the second week I was there, or third week possibly, we did The Man Who Came to Dinner, which had quite a big cast and also a lot of children that if I remember rightly, I think they came and sang a Christmas carol or something like that in it. And I was in it as a teenager, and or supposed to be a teenager, actually. I was a little more than that, but I was supposed to be a teenager. And we had a little troupe, a crocodile of little lads who used to come over from Bernardo's. They had to be ushered in practically on entrance and out because there just wasn't any room backstage. And they came in for each performance that week. It was rather fun.
I remember on one occasion they were all kitted out in new frocks, check gingham dresses, and they were allowed to keep them afterwards. Oh my, that was thrilling. Yeah, quite a few children. Marvellous how they learned, how quickly they learned, and as though they'd sort of been born to it, as part of the play. It was wonderful for them, and I thought it was ever such good training, because they had to be obedient, didn't they? You see, they had to learn their lines, otherwise they wouldn't get asked again. It was really good for them.
And of course all sorts of things were borrowed as props. Ruth Kettlewell said they all developed what you'd call prop eyes.
You go into people's houses and you think, oh, that would look marvellous on next week's set, wouldn't it? So you kind of spread the word round, tell the ASM to go and ask Mrs. So-and-so for that beautiful thing that she'd got, things like that. Yes, you did have prop eyes. The public were wonderful. They would help, and they'd give you their best pieces of vases or pieces of jewellery or dresses, anything. I mean, they were really wonderful the way the public helped. Yes, they considered us their company, and they were ready to help, and they were wonderful.
You must have been terrified, though, if you were given a bit of best china to use.
Oh, absolutely terrified, yes. Yes, but, yeah, we respected it and were careful.
John Lavender was manager of Engledow and Gallants, a jewellers in Broad Row. He regularly provided props, or made them, like a set of medals for a part played by actor David Morrell in Charlie's Aunt.
And I made him up several rows of medals using any medals that came out of the scrap. And I made about 5 rows, but every time he moved, these things would clang, and he loved it. He loved it. And he came on one night, and he's talking away, and something is said to him in the play where she said something had happened, and he assided to the audience, "By God, where was the regiment then?" And I was the only one that burst out laughing.
Because you knew where the medals had come from.
Yeah, but I thought that was funny when he said, "By God, where was the regiment?"
So were they always calling on people like you? I mean, when you look at the old programmes, it always says jewellery by Engledow and Gallant.
Well, nearly every week. Old clocks, something in a setting, an old alarm clock or an old striking clock, give them jewellery. Well, the name was in nearly every week, wasn't it?
And you obviously didn't mind, you trusted them, you were quite
happy. Oh,
yes,
that's right. We put it into a book, which they just brought it back. Well, I was quite happy. One of the girls, and I can't remember her name, she had to play the part of Eva Braun, and she wanted some lace that looked like German lace, and Doris fixed it up for her. What she gave her, I don't know. Whether that was personal or from Platten's Limited, I don't know. Trying to think of the other little girl's name. Oh yeah, Gabriel Hamilton. She came into the shop one day and she said, "I wonder if you can help me, please." She said, "I'm staying over South Town in Diggs and I've accidentally moved the chiming clock." She said, "I can't get it to go again." So I went over and set it going for her. We'd pass them on to someone else, if there's anything particular they wanted. Especially in the rows. Don't forget 100 shops down here, near enough, or whatever there was, and they could get almost anything. But because they always wanted it for nothing, didn't they? But you got a free advert.
John and his late wife Doris were among the regulars at the Little Theatre.
We used to go nearly every week. Hardly missed a week. Hardly missed a week. And of course you used to see the same people there week after week, month after month. Some of them stick in my mind on the spot. And what was the name of the one where the car crashes through the side of a house? What's that called? Manhunt?
Could be.
I think it was.
Right.
And David had a smashing part in that. Really great part. And of course they did Rattigan, didn't they? Terence Rattigan.
Yes, they did. One week it was Deep Blue Sea, but as Anthony Cundell reveals, they didn't stick to the script. He was playing opposite an actress called Irene Inniscourt.
And she was playing Hester, the woman, and I was playing her husband, her estranged husband, who only has 3 entrances, one in each act, and one scene. So, in a way, there's a certain amount of pressure because you feel, this poor girl, she's on stage, never leaves it. You must sort of support her when you get on. So I came on, and she says to me, "Would you like a cup of tea?" And I say, "No, don't let's waste time over a cup of tea." And then I have to say something that I couldn't remember what it was, no idea. So I thought, well, I'd have to resort to the old ploy of saying there's only 2 of us on stage. I know it was my turn to speak because she'd been the last one to speak herself. So I said, "I just don't know what to say." Now, normally Irene had sort of got me out of it by saying, "Weren't you going to say so-and-so?" But this time she'd gone blank as well and said, "Neither do I." So I thought, oh dear. So I said, "Well, look, I tell you what, I will have that cup of tea after all," which meant that she could go off stage, presumably into the kitchen to put the kettle on. So I wander around the stage looking as though I'm looking at the things in the flat, pictures and on the walls and that. And out of the corner of my eye I can see the lad who's on the book prompting. He's lost his place. Irene Inniscourt is going through the pages. And the pages stop riffling, so she's obviously found the right place. She comes back on and said, "Oh," she said, "the kettle won't be long." And then she said, "Oh, by the way, did you see Freddie as you came in?" And that was my line. I should have said, by the way, I saw Freddie when I came in. And she said, "Did you see Freddie?" And out of sheer devilment, I said to her, "I wasn't going to tell you," which creased her completely. So anyway, we got through the rest of the scene, and I got off, and then she had to remember to go and turn off the kettle. Otherwise, there would be somebody in the audience saying, "Now, why isn't that kettle boiling?" It would worry them, you know. But those sort of things happen, and I don't think the audience on that night particularly noticed any difference, because we were ad-libbing, but in some way ad-libbing in pure Terence Rattigan, with sort of clipped sentences and within the play.
Having appeared as an actor and director, Anthony Cundell then took on running the company, by this time for summer seasons only, from 1957 until it closed in 1969, when Lord Delfont's leisure company bought the building and turned the theatre into a cinema. Even now, Anthony Cundell wonders how he fitted it all in and learnt to play golf.
I look back and think, where did I find the time? Where were the hours? But what I'd be doing would be reading plays. If I'd seen 3M, 2F and all this sort of business, I'd send for copies of it. And that meant I had to read it. Then I think, well, that we could do that because we've got the right sort of cast for it. Then you'd have to start plotting it out for next week. Meanwhile, you're learning the part you've given yourself for the previous week and directing the play as well. And then in the evenings, you've got a sort of front of house staff, which was about 2 usherettes and Vi Palmer, who was our sort of general manager, and the box office. And so I'm sort of in charge of that as well. So where I found the time to do the golf, that's the fascinating thing to me. And the only reason I gave it up was because I was drawn to play opposite Jimmy Tarbuck in one of these celeb things that they had. I was the worst golfer in the world, and I thought, well, I must put some show up for Jimmy Tarbuck, you know, because he hadn't become good at golf in those days. So I went and had a practice round, and one of my better shots that I thought, the club hit the ground instead of the ball, and I put my back out. So that really was the beginning of the end of my golf.
Ruth Kettlewell certainly didn't have time to play golf. She says the routine was really tough.
You were probably playing an Irish drunk one week, so you had to get that done, and then the next week you were playing the Duchess of Stinking Push. And the week after that you were playing an American something. I mean, you had to keep switching accents and obviously characters and things. How we ever got a character and managed to get it over in a week, I will never know, but we did. And you sweated at it all day because you had to do the Act 1 on Tuesday. Well, you're supposed to know it. Act 2 on Wednesday, Act 3 on Thursday, and a vague run, I think, on Friday. No, I don't think we even had that much. We had the run on Saturday, and then the dress rehearsal on Monday, by which time you'd got another script and you had to learn. Yes, it was pretty hairy. Sunday's the only day you had to wash your hair, you had to make clothes for the following week, probably. I was always making hats and things for the following week, because you had to have about 3 lots of clothes for each play. In those days when there were 3-act plays and they all had a beginning, a middle and an end. And so you always had to have an evening dress, and you couldn't wear the same evening dress, 2 weeks running. Well, you couldn't possibly, could you? It was a different play, it was a different part. And you had to have summer, and always in the most freezing days of winter, we put on things like desert islands and things, things that were boiling sun, and the goose pimples came out and you were blue. In the height of summer, we always did things in the middle of darkest Russia or something, where it was freezing cold, and you dressed up in furs. It was ridiculous, but there you are, and you had to have at least 3 lots of clothes for each play.
Like Anthony Cundell, Ruth Kettlewell ran the company for a time. Finding plays was sometimes a headache. They'd use ones which had just been written by budding playwrights, but not without a fair dollop of publicity hype, of course.
I used to have to write blurbs at the beginning of the programmes, and the blurbs I wrote about, next week is going to be the world premiere, you know, you must come and see it, it's the most fantastic play. Well, it probably was, but it was never seen again.
Oh, that was wonderful. Ruth just reminded me, they used to call them the world premiere plays. Well, really, some of the stuff was quite atrocious. But after a bit, we used to get rather blasé about these new plays. We used to learn the first 2 acts and make up the third. And when the playwright came on the opening, he never noticed the difference anyway, so it worked out very well.
I think, Ruth, this used to throw you somewhat, didn't it? I mean, you all wondered when Donald would ever get back to the part.
Yes, but it was great fun. I mean, he was so convincing. You see, nobody knew that he tried except the poor person who was opposite him. And he would rub it on the most arrant nonsense, but it made sense somehow. It didn't matter. The audience never knew. And then finally he'd get back onto it. You know, it was wonderful. But he was a lovely person to work with. So, I mean, we forgave him. It was lovely. And I was queen person for making up stuff myself, so I mean, I couldn't talk.
Anthony Cundell recalls one occasion when they just had to improvise. They only had one script.
So the only way to do it was, I think there was 5 of us in it, and we each took it in turns to take the script home, learn as much as we could, and then bring the script back the next day, and then keep going. Once you all got a good idea of what the story was about, but it was pretty hairy because, I mean, I didn't know a word. I just sort of ad-libbed my way through it and gave hopefully kept it within plot. But if any of the artists were hoping for a cue, a solid cue, I don't think they were hoping for it because we were all in the same boat. But luckily that only happened once because it's not a very, very good experience, I can assure you.
When it came to learning a part, Donald Adams found a good quiet spot.
I used to learn all my lines because we had 3 plays going at a time. We were acting in one and we were rehearsing the next day for the following week, and then we had to read and try and get some lines of the 3rd play. And during the season, the quietest place I could find to learn my words, I used to go to the cemetery and sit in the seat there and just sit in quiet and learn my words.
If to the audiences it seemed glamorous on stage, it was anything but behind the scenes, especially in the cramped dressing rooms. Although the little theatre is now a cinema, they're still there. John Hunt paid a sentimental journey and found it little changed.
It's exactly the same. It really is. It's exactly the same. But they've filled in a little bit because it was one long room. So you had a sort of through corridor, and then you've got the partitions.
And we've got, what, 2 dressing rooms here? Is that all there was?
No. This was the men's dressing room, and the ladies' dressing room used to be through here on the left. Ah, it's still here. It's still here. This was the ladies' dressing room. Now, why the ladies' dressing room was the size of a rabbit warren, which is about 10 by 8, I'll never know. And why the men had this palatial long stretch, I just don't know. But this was it. Here, there used to be a very funny metal washstand with a bowl with a little plug in the bottom, but there used to be a jug of water, and that's the only way you could wash. And we all used to wash in the same water and pour it through into the bucket. No running water up here at all. It used to come from front of house.
This little tiny sort of alcove thing was the prop room. We had a big prop table here, because that went up 3 treads there to the stage, 3 stairs to the stage. And then later, we got promoted, the women got promoted and put in here, which used to be a sort of storeroom, prop room. We were put in that tiny room, about 5 or 6 women crowded in there. How we ever made up in there, I cannot imagine.
Well, I think we can just about make our way through here. So here we are, looking a bit bedraggled now, but this was the ladies' dressing room, wasn't it?
Yes, it was indeed. Can you imagine 5 or 6 women trying to dress in here, and especially if it was a...
Well, if it was period costume or something, you'd have an awful job, wouldn't you?
Awful.
But you coped, of course.
Of course we coped, yes. Yes, we did, and loved it.
Swing doors there. How incredible. Against that wall, I know we used to do all our makeup. We used to make up, because you had to make up yourself in those days. And in the winter, it was very, very cold here, and the sticks of 5 in 9 by Leishner used to freeze as well. And one used to put the sticks of makeup onto the electric bulb to melt them a bit so you could put them on your face.
These days, actors would expect showers at least. In the little theatre, they didn't even have a toilet of their own.
And you had to go down, you had to use the general public's loo. And the only way to get was through this back door and down these stairs. And this hasn't changed at all, not in 42 years. The stairs are the same, the banister rail is definitely the same, and I think it almost smells the same. Now obviously we would be going down at a much faster rate if a production was in, because sometimes you only had 10 minutes. So you charge down these stairs. Now I think I'm going to be lost actually, because I don't quite know what that is, but I think, as I remember rightly, the loo would be to the left and round that way, but it's no longer there.
So it's a real mad dash to get there.
It could well be a mad dash, yes, and particularly if you've got 2 or 3 people who've been on for like a long scene and everybody wanted to go. It was like a herd of elephants coming down here and then charging up again. And on the rare occasions when tummy bugs struck the theatre, well, you can draw your own conclusions, can't you, really?
The stairs down to the toilet, well, that was just a minor inconvenience like everything else backstage about this little theatre. The important steps, well, they were the 3 up to the stage. That was where the magic was created.
And that's the door going up to the stage. Well, this really does bring back such marvellous memories.
So here you would stand about to make your entrance?
Yes, going through all the words, hoping I can remember them. And yes, I've paced up and down this corridor a few times. I tell you, in the time I was here, this was the roots which gave me a good standing for the rest of my career, which I didn't know was going to turn into the operatic world. But there's no doubt that my stage experience has helped me greatly in the roles I've been asked to play, because if one has a reasonable good voice, it's not quite enough these days. You've got to be able to act and look the part, and I do find that all my acting experience does stand me in very good stead in the opera world. It certainly gets you around the world.
There used to be some steps. I used to go up to the stage area. Never ever dreamt that I'd do it, actually. Never thought it would be so easy. It wouldn't be that easy now, would it? See a play on Monday and asked if there's a job and start on the Tuesday. Gosh, I was very lucky. You know, I owe this place so much.
And I remember coming to the theatre and thinking, as I crossed over the bridge and saw that wonderful town hall and the boats and the things on the river and the nice quayside, I thought, I'm going to like this place. And boy, did I like it. I loved being here.
And we loved having them here. The little theatre, though it's over 20 years since the curtain finally came down, still holds a special place in many people's memories.
When I left ballet school, I went straight into the theatre and had never worked the other side of the curtain, and I found it fascinating. And quite honestly, I wouldn't mind going back tomorrow to do it all over again.
If it was open, I'd go now. Yeah, I'd still be going, because it was the one thing we looked forward to in the week. And the plays were awfully good. On the whole, they were very good, really. And I used to say, well, if they had been West End actors and actresses, it couldn't have done any better. I love going to the theatre.
Every time that curtain went up, the grease paint mingled with the atmosphere, and, well, if you were stage struck like me, then the adrenaline started to run. And every time the curtain went up, I always got excited.
It was astounding. It was magic when you went there. I mean, Ruth Kettlewell, Todd, Hunt, and all the rest of them there, and they could take you where television can't and films can't. They could create an atmosphere that was, well, it was all I can say was magic.
I don't think, in all honesty, looking back, and maybe the spectacles are slightly rose-coloured now, there were ever any bad performances, because nobody could survive if they were bad in this game, particularly here in fortnightly rep or weekly rep and twice nightly rep. You couldn't. If you were bad, you just couldn't survive. And what I learned here stayed with me for the rest of my life. It's better than any drama school. Much harder work. Slavery, nobody would do it now, but I'm glad I did.
The story of the Little Theatre, Great Yarmouth, was told with the assistance of John Hunt. A play at the Seaside was produced and presented at our studio in Great Yarmouth by Tony Mallion.